cannabis as a legitimate treatment option has been exiled for such a long period of time.
You don't know what you don't know, and it's so hard to find that information out there by yourself.
You have some of the strongest pharmaceutical laws and standards here in Australia. You just will never get clarity when you're buying from the black market. It is really hard when you're being lured in, right? And you're being love bombed, right? By these clinics being like, we do this, we can do that. It's $19. We give the best care. We've taken care of 100,000 patients.
And there's been none that have been bad.
And their retention rate is so low, but we're not going to tell you that.
Yeah, no.
I was born to be free.
So welcome.
Thank you.
To the Bloomley podcast. I'm so excited to have you here. Do you know, funnily enough, I was actually speaking to Lisa from Astrid yesterday on the phone, and I mentioned you and mentioned that you were coming onto the pod. And I was saying how just refreshing it is when you sit down with another woman who just gets it immediately.
100%.
Like when we sat down that first day, we were just like,
it just clicked.
yeah, it was immediate. Like we just went, okay, we just get it. We get how this industry operates.
Absolutely.
We know what the patients need. And hence why I wanted to bring you on. And I think it is such an important time to be having a conversation about the patient process, what people should expect, how to vet a clinic, what red flags to look out for, considering the absolute chaos that we have seen in this industry, I think, over the last couple of months. I feel like every morning I've just woke up to—
There's something popping up.
I know. And I think, you know, in this industry, you know, especially for people like us who have been in it for such a long period of time, is that we knew what was going on behind the scenes, right? We knew that there was clinics operating in this space that were putting profits over patient care. And now I feel like it's getting probably the media that it deserves.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely. They're kind of coming under fire a bit now, and people are becoming more and more aware that maybe the cheapest clinic out there isn't actually giving you the proper experience that you deserve as a medicinal cannabis patient, which is really disheartening, because I think for a long time patients have had to kind of find their own information. They've had to Google it themselves, and they've had to just go, well, I mean, this one's cheaper than this one, and this one kind of has a really great website and it has a lot of doctors. It must be good. And then they jump in, and then, you know, they don't necessarily have that patient care first. And it impacts their future in medicinal cannabis as well. You know, they don't have that trust. They don't have that rapport with their practitioner anymore. And that's a really big barrier for, you know, destigmatizing cannabis itself.
Oh, 100%. Like who you go on your cannabis journey with will completely define your experience with it. Completely. And there is something so alluring as well. And, you know, I myself and even my friends and people that I've spoken with as well, you know, seeing free consults, $19 consults pop up like onto your, you know, Facebook page. And we know that these people are spending millions and millions of dollars on marketing.
Crazy amount.
And when you type it into Google and you put in, you know, Medicinal Cannabis Australia, most of those kind of clinics are popping up first.
Straight on the ads.
Straight onto the ads, and you're getting sponsored ads just popping up at you. And I get it. I get it. And also I think that's something that I have learned so much since being in the cannabis space and having the Bloomley community is I have had to check my privilege so often when it comes to healthcare, because it is a privilege to be able to access healthcare, and it's expensive, and cannabis is also expensive, right?
Definitely, too much.
So yeah, and asking someone to, you know, fork out, it may be $150 or $200 for that first consult, that can be a lot of money for people.
Absolutely.
So I get it. I get when they see something pop up that says free.
Absolutely. If I see something for free that comes up on my Instagram, I'll immediately click on it because I eat with my eyes. I'm there to look. I'm there to see. But and that's the unfortunate thing is that cost is still such a prevalent issue in the medicinal cannabis industry. I mean, we're really lucky that there are brands out there now that do a lot of concession-based access, compassionate access for patients. And that is so pivotal, I think, to giving people who don't necessarily have the funds to fork out $150 as well for that continuous medication each month. It's so much money for people to invest into their health, but oftentimes they have no option. They've tried everything. They're disheartened. Nothing's worked. You fall into that desperation of just needing something to work. And if you're not even prescribed something that's appropriate for your condition, you're given a high strength sativa flower with no CBD oil for that daytime use for anxiety, there's a possibility that may actually increase your anxiety rather than help to keep you at a good, stable, consistent baseline. But you don't know what you don't know. And it's so hard to find that information out there by yourself. So you really do kind of free fall a little bit when it comes to this industry if you don't have, that privilege and that access to the education yourself.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
It's really quite sad, the things that we hear when we do a lot of pre-nurse calls prior to people coming in and having a consultation. We kind of have a chat with them about, have you used cannabis before? What have you been doing? What's the condition you're wanting to treat? Kind of gain a little bit of transparency before they even get through the door. And having that conversation, you learn so many kind of disheartening stories about what they've experienced, or not to say it's every clinic out there. Sometimes it's also when they go down the road and they've paid $800 for a hemp oil. And they've been told that it's a really high-strength CBD oil and it's going to cure all your symptoms. You're going to feel amazing. And then they use it and they've got no support with dosage, no support with administration, no support with increasing your dosage. And they don't have that effect, but they've forked out all of this money. And then they come in and they go, medicinal cannabis doesn't work for me. I can empathize and I can understand.
Yeah.
It's a really prevalent issue still in this industry today. If
don't even get me started on the black market.
Oh my goodness.
That's like a whole podcast.
It is, isn't it?
in itself.
Yeah,
but no, I agree. Especially, you touched on a really important point, which is education. And I feel like we're in this, and I've said it before, I think on this podcast, like we're in this kind of it's a double-edged sword, right? Because at one, equally on both sides, we're trying to educate consumers, but then we're also trying to educate educators. Absolutely. At the same time, whilst we know that cannabis as a legitimate treatment option has been exiled for such a long period of time, right?
So stigma. Yeah. You're fighting the stigma every day.
Yeah, and there's so many doctors out there who don't want to be labelled as the pot doctor, right? But we're also kind of learning at the same time, and I think there's something so poetic about that we get to learn. But one thing that I actually haven't spoken about on this podcast yet, which is quite funny considering it's probably the most like basic conversation I should have had from the very beginning.
On you go.
I just went straight into it. But I really want today's podcast to be sent to people who are considering cannabis or don't even know where to start when it comes to how to have that conversation or where to go. Absolutely. So I think it is important to be able to speak about how we can access cannabis in Australia and what are those routes available to us.
Absolutely. It's a very big question, and it kind of involves breaking it down as well. Like, I mean, if we look at just kind of the first process, which is going to your GP, you've trialed everything under the sun and you're just feeling so disheartened, nothing's worked. Your GP may or may not know about cannabis and they may recommend it as an option. They may even give you a script. If they give you a script, they most likely are applying to the TGA for that one script to be approved. So essentially the government gets this approval that states your condition, some information about it and how often they intend to monitor you. And if the government approves that scripting, then you get to give it a go and hopefully find a good effect.
And every doctor in Australia can legally prescribe medicinal cannabis.
They can indeed. So if you go through the TGA and you submit that special access scheme approval, you can send it on through and you can essentially have it given as a script to your patient and GP. But the problem there is a lack of time. I mean, as we know, GPs are under the pump at the moment. They're already doing so much within that community that adding something on like cannabis, which that does require an extensive amount of education and learning about the plant and learning about the body and the endocannabinoid system, it's a very time-based problem that a lot of people unfortunately don't have access to on top of their general job. And I can absolutely empathize with that, which is why having that ability to refer to a medicinal cannabis clinic it's a great option, because then you've got someone who's monitoring your patient's care, you know exactly where they've gone, and you can kind of make sure that that patient is at least able to communicate with you how they've been going with their care. Most doctors that work at cannabis clinics are what we call authorised prescribers, which means that essentially they've gone through the process of submitting application after application. They've been able to essentially prove that they know how to prescribe medicinal cannabis and how to monitor those patient experiences, side effects, adverse events, kind of all of those things there. So they could potentially provide you with a script right after your consult. They may recommend a pharmacy that you can go and get your medication dispensed at, and then you kind of go through that journey. But a typical consultation at a cannabis clinic, it really does depend on where you go. I can really only speak for my experience where I'm working now at a NANDA. I essentially have the opportunity to get to chat to patients prior to them stepping through the door. They can, book in a free nurse call, and we have that open-ended chat. We build a little bit of rapport, because a lot of those questions are, is it just THC that you're going to prescribe for me? No, not at all. I don't want to get high. I understand. I don't either. It's not about that. It's all about finding that positive symptom management. I'm on this medication. Will this interact? All of these questions are things that we can moderate before they even step through the door. And I think that transparency is so integral in this industry, and knowing and giving patients a ballpark on what to expect during a consultation, what to expect in terms of a general ballpark figure and what you may be looking at spending to give this a go. Because a lot of our patients, we're located in Byron Bay, and a lot of our patients have been impacted by floods and have had, environmental stresses that have really contributed to their symptoms, their chronic conditions essentially. So having that ability to have that open-ended chat and give them that expectation, I think is something that is really necessary in this industry. And once you've kind of had that experience, you get a 30-minute consult with the doctor. They ask you about what you've trialled in the past, any surgeries, medications, current medications. But the most important thing is, what are your goals? What do you want to get out of cannabis? Why are you here? And, if it's, I want to improve my sleep, I want to reduce my anxiety, I want to be able to get up and play with my kids and not have severe pain. Those are all things that I think are the factors that contribute to a positive outcome, because we're not looking at a condition anymore. You and I could have the same condition, and the way it presents could be so different. So if we just look at that general condition and we don't look at the patient as an actual person and the symptoms that kind of come along with that, and we don't glean that out of them, we don't ask them open-ended questions and get them to kind of lean into what they're experiencing, do we really kind of know how to treat it? Because I could have anxiety and experience no panic attacks, but I could just have a really hard time getting to sleep. You could have anxiety and experience regular panic attacks. The way we'd approach care would differ. It would immediately differ. But I think kind of going back to those basics of just looking at those goals for care is so important, just to kind of have the patient included in that and go, okay, well, in 4 to 6 weeks' time, let's check in on these goals. Did you get to sleep? Did you manage to get up in the morning and that pain wasn't there? Did you manage to even go to the shops and that panic attack-like sensation that can sometimes pop up, was that there? Or did you find you were able to kind of walk through, grab your groceries, go home? You feel that sense of accomplishment, and that's something that I think needs to be commended. It's a really hard journey for patients, and I think having that time with a doctor, that time with a nurse, support in between consultations, that's how you get the most out of your medication. Education is empowerment. To me, education is how patients learn to advocate for themselves. It's how they feel like they can go back to their GP and go, actually, no, this has been working. I do want to continue this. I want to reduce down my medications, and I want to continue with the cannabis. because they know how it works. That process of reinforcing mindfulness is everything. Yeah. And it's how I think we should approach the care myself.
Yeah, absolutely. So you just unpacked everything so beautifully. And I want to cover everything that you just said.
I know.
No. There's so many different elements to that I'm like, okay, I need to remember that so we can go back to that. But there is a third way that I just quickly want to talk about, and you know that I'm so passionate about research. There is a third way that people can access, and that's through clinical trials. It is a very unique way, but the only reason I want to give it some coverage and some light is because recruiting in that space is really, really hard, but it is another way that people can access it if, you know, they don't want to start with their doctor or they don't want to start with the clinic. There is a lot of trials currently running in Australia at the moment, and you can apply and then they will take you through the process themselves. So just quickly want to say that to anybody new. Yes. But one thing that you mentioned about, how you put care so beautifully and actually taking that time to understand, you know, by actually looking at the patient, understanding their goals is so important. But one thing that you just spoke about was how the first consult that you're having with the patient or the potential patient, I should say, is 30 minutes, which is that is like finding a needle in a haystack in the cannabis space at the moment. I have heard, and I know this because I speak to people in this space every day, and people always message me on Bloomly, is I have heard about people having 5 to 10 minute conversations on their first consults. How is it possible to cover even just your medical history in 10 minutes?
Say it politely, you can't. You absolutely can't.
Yeah.
And you know, to have 10 minutes with a doctor, it's not enough time for you to build a rapport. I truly believe that, you know, face-to-face consultations, video consultations instead of a phone call, that's how you can connect with someone, just by even being with them in that space and also not rushing them. You don't want to rush someone through their journey. At the end of the day, taking the time to sit down and really be engaged and not sit there and go, okay, well, you have anxiety. I know all of the symptoms that you probably have. This will work for you, you know, and like taking that time to unpack symptoms when you experience the flares of anxiety. Do you get stuck in a vicious thought cycle before you go to bed? You know, all of that is going to play a part in how we monitor and moderate care. And getting an understanding as well of patients' understanding of cannabis is so important. The way I would approach a consultation or the way I would approach a call with someone who maybe wants to look at accessing medicinal cannabis is going to differ depending on whether they've been using cannabis for decades, they know exactly what works for them, or someone who's elderly and is quite concerned about cannabis. You know, that call will probably more so breaking down the stigma that their friends have maybe even been telling them about, cannabis. I had a horror story back in my day with cannabis, or I took a edible and I was just on the floor, and they come in thinking,
it's happened to the best of us though.
I can empathize, that's for sure. So, you know, I feel like it's really important to first and foremost validate that and go, that can happen. But the way that we structure this is so it doesn't happen, so that you've got the support on board, you know exactly what you're doing. And if you're quite nervous, let's schedule a call for a week. Let's schedule a call for that fortnight. Let's check in with one another so that before you increase your dose or you trial something a little bit different, you've spoken to someone, they're giving you the go-ahead, and they've kind of told you it's going to be okay. You know, it's a small increase most of the time with cannabis, not drinking a whole bottle of wine in comparison to having a sip of it. So,
sorry.
Yeah.
My phone, I've never been so popular in my whole entire life. My butt has been vibrating that whole time since we started recording. I'm so sorry to interrupt you whilst you were on a roll.
No.
I agree. And this is actually, I'm really interested in this conversation because, again, it's one that I've had quite often is you are obviously in a location, you know, not to stereotype this, but, you know, in Byron Bay. And I mean, just generally, I think in Australia is that people have been consuming cannabis for a very, very long time illegally, right? And we know that. And it is the number one most consumed drug in Australia. And it's so interesting to me that when I have a conversation with someone, they will normally say to me, well, I've been consuming cannabis for 20 years. I know exactly what works for me. But what I find really interesting is a lot of them still have symptoms.
Absolutely.
They still have symptoms, and they're not actually they're not getting better. They're just, consuming it from what I would call like an adult use mindset, and not using it to actually, consume medically and to treat, which is what, why the medical route exists, right? But there is a level of, I don't want to say arrogance, because that's a little bit of a harsh word, I feel, but it's this mentality of, I've been doing this for so long, I know what I need. And I think that's really reflected in the products that we're seeing on the market at the moment. The majority we know are high THC strains, because the majority of people accessing cannabis legally are young males. Nothing wrong with that, but go the girlies. We need more. But I think that is also a reflection, right, on the industry and where we're at. But from your position, and I'm sure that you see this so often, is people coming in and being like, I know what I need, I know what I want. Can you just give me a high THC strain because this works best for me?
Yes. I have
I'm sure you have some stories.
Experiences. And first and foremost, like, my job is never to judge. I'm not here to shame someone for their prior usage. In fact, if anything, I'd prefer to know, because the way we approach that conversation is going to be so different in comparison to someone who's maybe cannabis naive, never touched it, and doesn't want anything to really do with it, just to manage symptoms. But when you have someone who has been using for such a long time, they feel like high THC is the only thing that works for them. It isn't a one conversation story. It's a lot of conversations in between consults and trying to really change that mindset, because why are you here if you're still having high THC? You're smoking bongs, you're smoking joints all day. You're actually not really going outside. You're not doing those activities that bring you that joy. Are you using appropriately, or are you more using and just masking and sitting there kind of in that space? So when we approach that conversation, first and foremost, I still validate their experience and go, I can understand that. You've kind of had some good experience. You've got a good idea of some things that you've maybe tried that have worked for you. But in terms of that consistency, this must be first and foremost costing you a lot of money. And they go, yes, it is costing me a lot of money. I'm having 10 grams in 3 days, and it's costing $150 every time. It's a lot of money. And oftentimes when we talk about oils, there is a little bit of that pushback. There's a little bit of that resistance, because when we look at CBD, non-psychoactive, and it takes time to build up in your system, it's not going to have that immediate gratification within 5 to 10 minutes of you feel that effect, you feel relaxed, you feel calm. It's a process, and you have to build it up to your personalized dose. But going through that process and being able to utilize something alongside a flower, and then reducing down that flower usage as we increase something else, we should start to see that you're able to actually reduce down how much you're smoking. First of all, get a vaporizer as well. Do your lungs a service, please, so that you can continue to have positive symptom management and not necessarily rely on that high consumption of THC. I mean, when you use a bong or a joint, you're burning about 65% of the actual cannabis. So you're burning money.
I thought it was 80.
Yeah, it could be. Don't quote me on that, but it could be something like that.
It's a huge amount.
It is a lot. So, I mean, it's essentially just kind of burning money. But when we have that oil conversation and we talk about, the entourage effect, let's pop you on what we call a full spectrum oil, CBD, some minor cannabinoids in there to enhance the effect, and that THC still working in the background, still having a nice relaxing effect. That can be an appropriate plan for some, but it's not a one conversation. It definitely takes its time to kind of destigmatize CBD in itself and kind of push for that to be another option for care. But where I work, we always prescribe CBD. It's an essential part of the plant. high spurts of THC, all you're going to do is kind of dampen those receptors that are responsible for that psychoactive effect or intoxicating effect. And having that CBD on board, we're actually modulating or moderating that endocannabinoid system. We're utilizing it in an appropriate way in the background to keep that anxiety at bay, to manage that inflammation that comes along with osteoarthritis, for example. And the more we get patients to pay attention to that and reflect on their symptoms, the more they go, oh, I actually did get out of bed in the morning and my back wasn't aching, I didn't need to smoke a joint in the morning because my back isn't hurting. So getting them to reduce down their usage just slowly, it's a process for someone who's been utilizing cannabis for decades. To just stop straight off the mark is going to be very difficult. So, working with them on a reduction treatment plan rather than just going, no, you can't have access to that because you've been using too much. Working with them and making sure that there are constraints around scriptings, but you're using appropriately and you're also utilizing some form of CBD or an oral liquid for that more consistent baseline, you might find it actually does start to really have a positive effect and you can reduce down how much you smoke or how much you utilize in a day.
Conscious consumption for me has been such a big topic, especially this year. And I've been running with this tagline that conscious consumption is sexy, which
yes, it is.
Which I think is just, it's hot. I like it. I think, yeah, it is. It's hot. I like it. But I think it's just because, we are over consumers and we don't just see that in the world of cannabis, we see it in the world of alcohol, and it's very, very aligned with Australian culture to just over consume. And I think we in the end up abusing the plant and it's not there to be abused.
No.
Because, I've said this before, I'm not interested in getting people zooted. I'm interested in making people feel good. Absolutely. And that's the way that it should be.
Oh, definitely.
And I really loved how you've brought up about the power of CBD, because it's not this overnight destination, which we find with, something like as a high THC vaporizer, as an example. You feel the effects of that immediately. That onset is really quick. But someone once referred to CBD oil as a sexier fish oil, and I just loved that ever since I've heard it.
I remember when we talked, you said that, and it stuck with me. It was so funny.
It is. It's a sexier fish oil, but like most things, you have to take it consistently to be able to see the benefits of it. But it works in silence.
It does.
And it's only, it may be a month or 2 months down the track that you finally go,
I get it now.
That's it. That's it. And that's really hard, I think, for people as well, because we want things instantly, especially in today's world. We want it to work. We don't want to use a skincare product for 6 months. We want to stick a needle in our foreheads.
I want it now.
Yeah, I want to look good now. And I think that is something that a lot of people don't speak about when it comes to especially CBD.
Definitely.
Especially. Now, before I forget this question, and I kind of want to cycle back a little bit, is we've spoken about what the process should look like, right, for patients. And given how we started this podcast talking about what we're seeing in the industry at the moment, is there any and I've struggled with this as well, as kind of vetting a cannabis clinic, right? And I've given directions to people before about things that they should be looking out for, whether that clinic is brand agnostic or, getting an understanding of the history of the doctors. But what are some red flags we should be looking out for when it comes to finding who we should go on this journey with? Because it's kind of like dating a man. Finding the right cannabis clinic. Like, they all start strong. Actually, I should retract that. It's not all men. It's just the ones that I date, apparently.
We'll discuss that later.
That's a whole nother podcast in itself. But I think that it is really hard when, you're being lured in, right? And you're being love bombed, right? By these clinics 100%. Being like, we do this, we can do that.
Check out this?
It's $19. We give the best care. There's, we've taken care of 100,000 patients.
And there's been none that have been bad or none that have had
and
any
their retention
problems.
rate is so low. We're not going to tell you that.
Yeah, no.
So what are some, or the question could be, what are the questions that someone should be asking themselves or asking a clinic up front before going on that journey? You mentioned kind of free nurse calls, and a lot of clinic providers do offer that now. Yeah, so really absolutely. Really so maybe is there like one or two questions that you think can give you some insight into if a clinic is good or not?
Yes, very good question. I would say more so even asking about the cost of your medication up front, like we were talking about before, the cost of the consults, how often you should follow up with your providers. That's really integral to know as well, because let's say you go to a clinic that says, oh, well, we want to catch up with you every month. Yes, it might be a $19 consult, but on top of your medication, you've got to review every month or every 2 months. And it's just that, again, is another contributor to cost. So knowing exactly how often to catch up with your provider, knowing exactly what the cost of your medication could be. I mean, very hard to gauge when you haven't had that consultation, but a ballpark at least, starting cost, what to expect before you walk in the door, and understanding of the legalities. If I'm prescribed THC, what's going to happen to me? We know that that's kind of a conversation that's been heading in a really positive direction. Good job to Victoria. But at the end of the day,
New South Wales, you're next.
Please. But even traveling internationally, traveling domestically, if you travel for work, pay attention to that in terms of medicinal cannabis too. Where can I get my medication dispensed? Is it going to be a subscription service, or do I have free reign with my scriptings to go wherever I would like, my local pharmacy down the road or a cannabis dispensary down the road? And I think most importantly, do you offer concession-based access? I think that is such an important aspect for people who hold that pension card, that concession card. We should be doing right by our citizens, right by our veterans, and essentially making sure that these people have access to medicinal cannabis at a subsidized rate. If it's there, we should be utilizing that. And if they go, no, we don't support concession-based products, maybe consider, continuing on with your journey. And it doesn't matter to clinics if you call them and 100 other clinics in a day, but it matters to you, So it's okay to reach out to multiple clinics, to get a guide, to get a gauge of what to expect. And you'll find that will really assist with even just setting the bar. But also, do you have access to education? Do you provide handouts? Will you provide me something so I know exactly what medication to take, when to take it, how to take it? Or am I just off on my own after that first consult? Because I'll be the first to admit it's overwhelming. It is a lot of information that gets thrown at you in potentially half an hour, potentially 5 minutes. So you need to make sure that you have something that you can refer back to so that you don't feel overwhelmed, so that you feel like you do have that comfortability. Because comfortability is what drives the plan with medicinal cannabis, nothing else. If a patient says no THC, they shouldn't feel pressured to trial it. It should be, okay, let's start with CBD. We'll see how you go. We know what THC does. We'll do that education part. But let's start with your comfortability first and we'll go from there. And then that really drives that plan home.
No, I mean, such good points. I love how you mentioned the subscription. Guys, just that in itself, I mean,
Schedule 8 medications
shouldn't be under subscription.
No, they should not.
Should not. There's something about that. And I think as well, a lot of people get into these situations, especially with some of these clinics where their scripts are locked in, as you said, and they're locked into the system with that clinic, right? And they can't get their scripts dispensed to them. They don't have e-scripts. They have to go to, a particular, a particular person to get it dispensed. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that, because I know clinics who do that and they're fantastic clinics as well. But I think that there's something to be said about that. One thing that you did mention was follow-ups. Now, in the world of healthcare, this is almost a little bit unique. And it's something that I've only really just kind of come to terms with as well. And a lot of people ask me, should I be following up? You know, some places want to follow up every 6 weeks. They want to follow up every 4 weeks. But I think in the beginning of your journey, especially whilst you're trialing different delivery methods and, you know, just getting an understanding of what's working for you and to be able to fully kind of take control of your own journey. Those follow-ups are so important.
They're integral.
Important. Yeah.
They're integral to making sure that you are reaching a positive health outcome. The way that we structure appointments at Ananda, I'm just kind of referring back to what my experience has been. After that initial consult, within 4 to 6 weeks, we want to see you again. We want to know how it's worked. We want to know what's changed. We want to touch on those goals. How did we go? Did you have any medication changes in this time? Did you stop a medication straight away? And as a result, how did your symptoms respond? There's so many things that we kind of need to dive into for that review to make sure that you're actually getting the best out of your medication, that you're not paying an arm and a leg, because I mean, in terms of dosages, everybody sits so different. What the dosage works for you could work completely different for me. And that's when we're able to kind of, again, adjust that plan accordingly. But let's say you come in after that follow-up, everything's perfect. You've found positive symptom management. You're really happy with how everything's going. You don't want to change a thing. Nothing has to be changed. It's all at your comfortability that we're talking about before with that. If you're happy with the plan and you want to continue on what's been working, perfect. We should be then able to extend that follow-up out 3 to 4 months. Go away, make sure you have a trial with your medication. If you had any questions or queries or even out of script options, you should be able to give your clinic a ring and have a chat with them. You should be able to look at other options, and the doctor may want you to come in for a review, again, very dependent on what's spoken about during that call. If you go, I've really been noticing that I've been going through my oil really quickly. I'm taking the max dose. It's as simple as saying, well, that doesn't sound very cost effective for you. Maybe we could come in, do a review and change up that plan a little bit. And oftentimes when you word it that way, patients go, oh yeah, this is probably costing me quite a bit of money. Maybe I should do the follow-up, change the plan over, and we'll see how we go.
I love that. I've never thought about that before.
Yeah, it's really important, I think, to make sure that you actually get the patient's involvement, you get their engagement, you make sure that they also understand what the maximum dose is before they even go away for that initial consultation. If you're taking up to this amount, give us a ring, because it sounds like that's probably costing you an arm and a leg. Let's say someone's on CBD only. The way that TGA classes CBD is what we call a Schedule 4, which is a prescription-only medication. So it's actually a valid script for 12 months. So for someone who's been really consistent on a CBD oil, it's been working really well for them, they might only do 2 to 3 follow-ups a year. But with THC and how it's classed as a Schedule 8, so a controlled drug, it actually expires those scriptings after 6 months. So the time in which you may follow up in comparison to your friend is, again, very dependent on what you're even prescribed. That regularity and continuity of care is everything. And having those follow-ups, I know that unfortunately they can be a bit of a cost at times, but to ensure that during the year you're not paying above and beyond what you should be, it's almost worth it to invest in that follow-up, to invest in that conversation with the doctor where you can sit down and you can really look at how much you're spending on your medication per month and change it to something more appropriate if so.
Absolutely. And there's always so many new products coming out in this space as well, and you may find a product that is similar but cheaper. And for somebody who is forking out how much they are forking out, there may be a change there as well. And I think that in itself, I think, is important. Again, just like talking about the cost of medication in this, especially in Australia, we know that it's not under PBS except for 2 products I know are under PBS. And there is other, we know that you can redeem some money through private health, but again,
very dependent on who that is.
And that actually working as well. I know of a lot of people who have tried to claim and it's been...
They don't make it easy.
But there is one question I want to ask, and I actually didn't put these on the questions that I sent to you. So not to put you on the spot, but obviously so you've been a nurse obviously in this space, and I'm sure that you've seen so many patients in your time. Is there a story that comes to mind with a patient that you can share that maybe just is something that you'll always remember or that hits home for you? Because I feel that, you know, and something that I do on Bloomly is I love to share people's stories and experiences when finding the plant. And it's something that I think is so powerful and relatable. So is there any story that comes to mind? I mean, I'm sure there's so many, but just something that really just kind of shook you to the core and was like, okay, wow, there really is magic in this.
Oh, goodness me. My passion lies in women's health. It always has. I mean, for the future of cannabis.
Chef's kiss.
Love women. For the future of cannabis, like I would love to see, you know, clinics designated towards women's health predominantly, having a safe space for women. And every part I play in a patient's journey is such a privilege and it's such a blessing. I feel like I take all of my patients with me in my heart sometimes, and when I'm getting close to my period, I think I cry a little bit more.
Love that. Yes.
But there was this one lady, and she was about my age. She was 24 years old. She was married, and she had been living with chronic debilitating pain from endometriosis for years and years and years. Pain during sex, so there was that lack of intimacy. There was that chronic pain aspect, and she felt like she wasn't a partner anymore. She felt like her partner was a caregiver, and I did a pre-consult nurse call with her, and it was the first time I felt almost brought to emotion during a call. Like I like to be able to separate it as much as I can, but I empathized with her so much in the experience that she had had, and I understand it. I have endometriosis myself, and you know, being able to empathize with a patient and get down on their level is something that I never ever take for granted. And hearing that story, it really made me want to just see her find some success. So when we got her in for an appointment, I gave her a ring before the consult. I took down all of the notes on how she was going. So the doctor basically just had to have a wee peek, and there was already like a whole narrative there. But, you know, they still did their due diligence, still did the 30 minutes. And I reached out to a few companies to see if there was anything we could do for compassionate access, which is something I strongly believe in. A big portion of choosing products is, you know, is it Australian owned and grown? Is it, you know, being clinically researched? So they put in the effort into that so that women actually have the ability to read those studies and go, this is an option for me. And is it something that they can potentially get subsidized? So we went through the process. They actually managed to get compassionate care. We checked in every fortnight. And I think it was at the 4-week mark. So they had 2 weeks left before their follow-up. And she called me and she was just beside herself. She was so emotional. And I was like, oh my God, it hasn't worked. Like, how am I gonna deal with this? And it was so positive. It was, it gives me goosebumps every time. But she was like, I'm able to get out of bed now. I'm able to consistently, even on my period, you know, go to the bathroom with ease. I'm able to mobilize with ease. My brain isn't sitting there. It's not ruminating, telling me all of these awful thoughts about myself and how lazy and unsuccessful I was, which breaks my heart to even hear that people with a chronic condition think of themselves that way. And she said, I had intercourse for the first time with no pain. Oh. I haven't had these debilitating chronic headaches like I usually have. I went to the mall and watched a movie with my friends. I got out of the house. Just that in itself was when I was like, okay, this is doing something. This is really working. Like women are now getting their lives back. And in those exact words, she said, I've gotten my life back. And there was still room to go. We hadn't solved every problem straight off the bat. And oftentimes that's not the way it works. We don't always get it right. It takes a little bit of adjusting and finding what will work. We're all very different. But in this one instance, she had had such a positive effect. Minor changes were made to that plan. And as far as I'm aware today, she's still on medicinal cannabis with that positive effect. And she's able to do those things that she wasn't able to do. And it reminds you why you're in this industry, I think. Yeah. So much crap goes on that really just, some days it just really dims you down. Yeah. And you just think, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
And then you speak with a patient and you make a tiny difference And you just think, that's why. Yeah. This is why I do it. This is why I love being a nurse. This is why I love that patient interaction. It gives you faith again. And it's never the plant's fault for, that lack of faith and that sort of disheartened aspect of this industry at times. It's the people that use it inappropriately or endorse it inappropriately. Yeah. But when we get back to those fundamental basics of patient care, positive patient care, holistic health, communicating and integrating with, general practitioners that they see, naturopaths that they see, specialists that they see, they might not all be on board with medicinal cannabis. They might have their own internalized stigma. But at the end of the day, if we're communicating, we've got that bridge with the patient, we've got that bridge with their practitioners, that is appropriate healthcare. That is integral healthcare. That's holistic.
Yeah.
That's how it should be. 100%.
Because sometimes there is like that disconnect, as you said, with other practitioners. And I think that, so, there's been multiple times that, somebody has gone to their GP and their GP has said, no, I don't prescribe that. I'm not willing to have a conversation about that. And then, they're obviously going into a clinic after that and having that conversation, but there's that disconnect between the doctor that they have at the cannabis clinic and their GP, right? Which is really, really challenging at the best of times. I can't wait for there to be a time in which it goes full circle.
Oh, the dream.
Like that's the dream, right?
Absolutely.
To be able to have everybody on board. And it also helps, kind of obliterate that shame and that stigma. And I just quickly love that story that you just told me. Like that is very similar to you. That is why I do what I do, because I hear stories like that daily.
I would like to say the platform that you've made for women is just, it's unlike anything I've ever seen before. Like before I even met you, I'd stalk your Instagram and I would peruse it and I'd have a look and I'd think, all of this information, the effort that she's put into creating a community, this is someone who truly cares. And when you invited me to come on here, I was like, oh my gosh, this is just everything I've wanted. It's the perfect first podcast. So
thank you.
Thank you for what you do.
Honestly, I couldn't do it without, I think, the community. Like they're my biggest driver. And as I said, I share a lot of patient stories on the platform, and I just try to normalize it, and without people sharing their stories with me, which normally kind of go on behind closed doors, right? Because in the world of cannabis, it's kind of it's a man's world, I would say, or talking about it. I have always felt it's been very masculine, right? It's normal and cool for a man to consume cannabis, but when a woman consumes it,
that's the look.
How, in your experience, again, how are you finding that conversation changing? Are you seeing more women come into practice?
I am.
And what's do you think that, can you see the change in the conversation?
I can. I can see it in the clinic itself where I work. It's all women and I'm here for it. I love it. I think we're so blessed to have the women prescribers that we do and to have that, not at all to say that obviously male prescribers aren't the exact same
we still
in terms
love
of their empathy. We do.
We still love you.
But having that female touch and that female empathy, I just think it's just when you're a woman and you're talking about something that's so private and personal, and again, we all know that women's health in general has a bit of a stigma. You go to the doctors, you have pain, let's pop you on the pill at 14 years old. That will work. And then you don't know about the side effects. You don't learn about adverse events because you're a young girl. You've been using this for years and years and years, and you see it as your only option, but it's not really even helping. That's a private and a personal thing to have to go through. And I talk to women day after day. I have friends after friends who all have that same experience of feeling like they haven't been heard, they haven't been validated, they don't feel like they're taken serious when they go in somewhere and they say, I've got chronic debilitating pain. Oh, it's hormones. Yes, but what will we do about it? And having that female empathy and that woman touch and woman validation, I think it's just unmatched when you're building a rapport and you're developing trust with patients. I have such a soft spot for my endometriosis girls purely because I know the journey. I've been on that journey. I can empathize with that journey and the frustration you feel. It does suck. And I'll say that too. It really does suck.
It does.
But you know, having that trust and having more and more women come in and tell us their stories, like I said before, what a privilege. What a privilege that I get to sit there and be a part of their journey and hopefully help them find some sort of positive effect. It's really a joy, and it definitely is changing. I see probably more women than I do men at the moment.
Okay, love that.
In my emails of free nurse inquiries, I give them a ring and I go, it's a woman. I love it.
Yeah, I do think it is changing. It is becoming, I mean, we still have a long way to go, but it's becoming far more normalized as well. I think that, you know, women are at least having the conversation now, and there's not as much judgment around that. You know, you can still be a great mother, a great CEO, a great girl boss, and consume at the same time.
Absolutely. So you don't have to swap one thing out for, you know, being able to live pain-free. It doesn't make you a bad person for using green market cannabis. You know, if that's what you've had the experience of and you feel shamed at the clinic that you're going to, they look at your prior usage and they say, well, that's illegal. Why would you do that? That's not the clinic for you.
Yeah.
That's not how we should be introducing cannabis care to people. You know, I mean, at the end of the day, if someone's been utilizing cannabis and predominantly, you know, a female using cannabis prior to their consultation and they're already ashamed about their usage, what good am I doing sitting there and telling them about how illegal it is and how bad it is? You can say, yes, that is unlawful at the moment and is a bit inappropriate to use it that way. Let's get you on the right track. Let's get you some support. Let's get you some frequency and consistency with your medication so that you can feel empowered to continue utilizing the plant, but using it safely for you. I think opening up the doors of that conversation is really important, and I never ever want to approach any patient's journey with shame or stigma. Yeah. There's enough of it out there.
Yeah, 100%. No, 100%. I do get a bit frustrated with the black market, but I have like my own battles.
Oh, of course.
with them.
And I think
I wouldn't say that I shame people for consuming black market products. But I will shame you if you're an influencer
endorsing
it with a coupon code.
Absolutely.
Gloves are off.
Completely inappropriate.
Gloves are
absolutely inappropriate.
And telling people it is legal.
Because those pop-up Instagram pages as well of just random products, and it's just click on the link and I'll deliver it to your door. No, stop doing that.
I had this one person that say that their product was TGA approved. I was like, oh, you've got balls.
Does a script come with it? Because if it doesn't, it's not.
I know, right? I know.
That's another crucial issue that we can see is that pre-patients, they don't really know that it's an option. So they have that influencer showing them with their huge following that this is an option. Let's use this. Is it tested? Do you know exactly what's in that medication? Who's actually extracting the cannabinoids from the plant? How is it being tested? Is it, you know, grown with PGR? What are we looking at here? Those are the questions, and it frustrates me to no end to see that people are endorsing that, because even the way it's legalized in Australia is already an uphill battle. We're already trying to prove that it's a legitimate option for patients, and that's the stick in the mud. That right there is a deterrent. We have patients come in who say, I've trialed a hemp oil, I've trialed a CBD oil, didn't work for me. Did you use it consistently? Did you use it daily? Did you use it every so often?
Where'd you buy it?
Yeah, where did you buy it? What's the strength of it? I don't know the strength of it.
Yeah.
Neither do I.
And that's, I think, you know, the clarity that you get from going legal. And look, I think, you know, and I'm the first to admit this, is that the legal system is far from perfect. It is flawed, and we've spoken here today about you know, clinics that are putting, you know, profits over patients, that, you know, in some aspects care is not up to standard. But what I can say and what I can speak to is that we have some of the strongest pharmaceutical laws and standards here in Australia.
Very rigorous.
And, yeah, very, very aggressive. And I think that you just will never get clarity when you're buying from the black market. Never. You will get clarity when you are purchasing legal products or getting it through the legal system. And now with the industry changing, which has a lot to do with the fact that people are accessing cannabis legally, which means we can now get the data we so desperately need. We can now, invest into the infrastructure that we so desperately need. The more people that partake, the only way to change the system is to partake in the system, right? Absolutely. And we're starting to see that. You mentioned, the driving laws are changing in states, which is great. And they're the benefits now that we're seeing out of becoming a legal patient.
Absolutely.
You can travel with it, not internationally to some countries. Wouldn't be going to Bali with it.
No. Please call the consulates or the embassies before you even consider taking it anywhere. You've got to do that research.
Absolutely.
But that domestic travel, you're right.
Domestic travel, driving in some states, there's, that's now changing, and I think that's really exciting. And also just the peace of mind of it, that you know that your product is legal and you know exactly what you're getting. And, doing that in accordance or, in collaboration with a doctor and a clinic or a nurse, whoever that may be, you're actually on a journey to feeling good. And I think that's the clarity that you get from going legal.
For sure. Most definitely.
Which I think is just so important, especially in the infancy of us understanding the plant.
For sure.
As a country.
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree. And I mean, it'll be interesting to see where we are in 5 years.
I know.
I'm hoping that in terms of our legalization process, for it to be something that you can get potentially over the counter, it's not going to be this rapid process where we lose that medicinal aspect. I think that, in other countries there may have been that sort of rapid acceleration into recreational use 100%. And that medicinal market got left behind. But having that support and that ability to be able to reach out to someone and have that legal script and that peace of mind, like you were saying, it's really integral to positive patient care, but also positive health outcomes. Not having that always looking over your shoulder because you're worried about driving, because you took your THC oil to help you sleep last night. Having that as peace of mind, it's not going to increase anxiety. It's going to keep it at bay. So,
and I know that people will probably rip my head off for saying this, so please don't rip my head off for saying this. But I think there is something to be said about, again, the system is flawed, and I'm not saying that I don't believe in adult use, because I think there is absolutely a time for it, but we are in this space where we are so lucky in some ways to be able to have the regulation that we do.
Oh, absolutely.
And to be able to really and fully understand the plant and to not abuse it. Definitely. I think that if adult use came to Australia, 5 years ago, I don't know if that would have been the best choice for our country.
I think you're absolutely right.
And again, don't come at me. I'm all for it. I'm all for, I'm all for home grows. I'm all for it. But I think, there's something unique about the fact that we get to really, truly understand the process for ourselves, because as you said, treatment looks different for everybody else. Absolutely. And because of that regulation, to a certain degree, we have to we have to slow down, be more conscious about how we consume it, and we get this opportunity to try lots of different delivery methods as well, that, under that kind of legal landscape.
I like the way that you refer to it as adult use.
Yeah.
I think that's a really nice term. I'll probably use it from now on.
Well, someone actually, when I went to this is showing how long I've been in this industry before. I went to MJ Biz conference.
MJ Biz.
Yeah, so it's the biggest cannabis convention in the world in Las Vegas in 2015.
2000? Wow.
Yeah, and I remember walking around this event and there was 1,800 exhibitors.
1,800.
And I mean, cannabis wasn't even legal in Australia at this point, and I just was walking around absolutely floored, being like, wow, this is something. And when they spoke about it, they never used the word recreational. They always used the word adult use, which I think is I use it recreationally, sometimes, but more so are always lean to adult use. Because I think if you're consuming cannabis recreationally or medically, you're a patient.
Oh, 100%.
You're a patient.
You dive into that recreational user, like you said, and you ask them why they're using, I need to be able to get to sleep. You're a patient. You're utilizing for a reason.
100%.
I use it to manage my anxiety. You're a patient. You're welcome.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Come join the fold. But I think education really is empowerment. It's what empowers us to be able to change legislation. It's what empowers patients to be confident in their care and in their health outcomes. That is the crux of this industry, and I think we really need to hone in on that and continue putting money into research, giving researchers the chance to be able to appropriately utilize the plant to look at how we can utilize it for certain conditions. And the work that they're doing is so fundamental to that, and I think it's amazing. It's amazing the work and the effort that they've put into making this a legitimate, viable option for people with that clinical research behind it.
100%.
It's what's shifting this industry. It's pivotal.
Honestly, unsung heroes of this industry are the researchers, but as too are the nurses. People like you. So thank you for doing all that you do. And I know that we have to wrap up now. We're coming to an end. But thank you.
Thank you
so much for coming on the pod. And I'm sure that if anybody has any questions, just leave it in the comments below. And yeah,